Hello and good morning. When I start a live stream, the beginning of it tends to skip a little bit. So if I talk, my words will be all mashed together. So give it a few minutes. But hello and welcome. This is going to be a fairly comprehensive live stream. I caught up on my sleep yesterday, so I'm up at a reasonable time this morning. But this is going to be a comprehensive live stream. I have titled it in a way that is meaningful for people who are interested in this subject matter. And now live on my channel, the timeline data that every Christian who is interested in end times Bible prophecy should know. So what I'm going to do here is just start sharing some stuff. And we're going to start with an overview of what is my most important chart. And since this doesn't like to share the first time, we'll just try it a second time immediately. I hope that works. I have a couple of different charts that I'm going to take you through, but we're going to start with this one because it is specifically involved in Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy. Is it showing? There it is. Good morning, Brooke. Good to see you too. Thank you. All right, so I can see it. This is Biblical Events Overlaying World History, and we're going to start in the upper left-hand corner. As always, this is available on my academia page for free. It is titled Biblical Events Overlaying World History. We are going to go through the whole chart. So prepare for this to be a hot minute. What you have here is Artaxerxes Longimanus I, the reigns according to the Persian calendar. So I will preface this by saying any of the years that I got for these events are taken from the historical records, not biblical sources. The dates, meaning the day of the month and or the month itself, are taken directly from the Bible, but the Bible does not give years. And so in order to ascertain the correct years for these events, you have to go to the historical record. I would never advocate going to a biblical source for the years, with one exception. And that is going to be outside the scope of what we are discussing here. The reason is because anyone who studies the Bible with a specific bent or desirous of a specific outcome is going to skew toward their wants rather than just telling you what the historical record says. So when we're talking about going to a historical record, and August 11, 465 BC, that comes right from the Persian historical record. Well, Artaxerxes I Longimanus was a Persian king. So I'm going to defer to the Persian historical record and say they probably know what they're talking about. They don't have an end times timeline bent toward a certain year or trying to make certain data fit. They're just reporting an event on a specific year, on a date in a specific year. That is what I am seeking, is people without agenda telling me just the information. So when I say that I went to historical records, I'm saying to the historical record of the country of origin, not anyone who has any kind of stake in an outcome or an investment in an outcome. They are just reporting information. And the reason I'm saying that right here is because this is a data point where people with agendas will take this out of context. Take this out of context right from the very get-go. They will say, no, it wasn't 465, it was 455, and they'll mess with it. You will see that a lot, which is why I will not rely on anyone with any kind of a biblical agenda for getting the specific years, because they have an agenda. The Persian people just reporting their history didn't have an agenda. So that's why I went to the Persian historical record and I said, okay, I'm going to probably make this a little bit bigger. That's what I want you to tell me. So why is this important? Okay, so we're going to start in the prophecy that is the most important to, and I did want to harp on that point. I'm hopefully preaching to the choir on the importance of integrity in Bible research, but unfortunately, you can't take that for granted. So it is important, imperative to have integrity in the conduct of your biblical research. And that means not just going to people who tell you what you want to hear, is concluding the correct information. And for that, you have to conclude to go to the correct sources. And if you don't do that and you start from the wrong spot and then your process is wrong, then your outcome is obviously going to be wrong. Since I'm interested in getting to an outcome that isn't wrong, my starting point is going to be correct and my process is going to be correct. You don't have to agree with it, but it is as integrous as possible. So what we're going to do is start with a prophecy that people want to know about. And we're going to go from start to finish through it. And that's where I'm going to take you on this journey, is how we can, with just about, I want to say absolute, because obviously these are prophetic. So there's no absolutes. If you start with the right spot and you use the right process, your outcome is going to probably be correct. That's where we're going here today. How do we get to the conclusions that I have drawn? Daniel 9:24. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity. And we're going to talk about how and when those were accomplished, and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. We're going to talk about when those shall be accomplished. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem, this is why we're starting here. Absolutely why we are starting here, because this is the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince. That's what this is. Shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again and the wall even in troublous times. So we're going to stop right there. So we have 2 data points that we are going to positively conclude from the information that we have been given. Now, while I do understand that there is a difference of opinion and people can substantiate whatever they think in whatever way they think it should be substantiated, but for the purpose of my research, we're going to go to where the text mirrors Daniel 9:25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem. The commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem is explicitly given in Nehemiah 2, verse 5. Come on, where are you, Nehemiah? There we go. Nehemiah 2, 5. Explicitly given. That thou wouldest send me unto Judah, which is the capital. It's the house of Judah, a reference to the tribes of Benjamin and Judah, whose capital was Jerusalem. So thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto Jerusalem, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it, to restore and to build Jerusalem. You can't get any more plainer in the plain text of the Bible than Nehemiah 2:5 as an answer to know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem as a starting point. So why people would go to Ezra and talk about the construction of the temple is beyond me. I don't understand that, but it's wrong, because Nehemiah 2:5 explicitly matches the text from Daniel 9:25 as the starting point for the commencement of the counting of any of Daniel's 70 weeks of years. So then let's back up a bit, because I have probably overfilled this with information. Hi, Hermanus, nice to see you. I've probably overfilled this with information, but it's important that we double check our work in as many opportunities as are possible to do so. So what you'll see is that I have Kislev, then Nisan are both in the 20th year per Nehemiah 1 and 2. Well, why is that important? Well, because Nehemiah 2:5 is your bookmark to the language in Daniel 9:25 as the starting point, the commencement of any of the 70 weeks of years at all, the commencement of the count. So it's important to know where we're at. And that's how we arrive at August 11th, 465 BC as the beginning of the reign of Artaxerxes, the first Longimanus. Why does that matter? It came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king. Okay, that's why it's important. That wine was before him. And I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been before time sat in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, Why is thy countenance sad, seeing as thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very sore afraid, and said unto the king, Let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? And that's a reference to the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the temple, circa 586 BC. Then the king said unto me, For what dost thou make request? So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said unto the king, If it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. Now, it is incorrect as a starting point to look for the construction of the temple. That is not what Daniel 9's prophecy begins with. It says, Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem, it is not talking about the building of temple number 2 post-Babylonian captivity. People start with that as a starting point, and that is incorrect. It very specifically says in Daniel, the rebuilding of the city, not the temple, the city, which means the city gates. So that's why Nehemiah 2, giving you as much information where it talks about the city, the place of my father's sepulchres lieth waste. The gates thereof are consumed with fire. So it's talking about the city itself having been sacked and burned in the same exile, the third and final exile of the Babylonian captivity. Yes, the same one that the temple was destroyed in. But the temple, the commencement of the rebuilding of the temple post-Babylonian captivity did not occur at the same time that they rebuilt the city. So you have to differentiate between the two, and you have to select your correct starting point. And that is what we have done here. Nehemiah 2:5 talks about the rebuilding of the city, which is specifically marked as the starting point of Daniel's 70 weeks count. So I said to the king, If it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. And the king said unto me, the queen also sitting by him, For how long shall thy journey be, and when wilt thou return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. So when we go to the historical record, and I'm going to leave you guys to do that on your own, to look up Artaxerxes I Longimanus. I have already done the legwork on this, so if you disagree or you wonder how I arrived at these conclusions, just go Google it yourself. But I'm just showing you how I have arrived at these conclusions and the scriptural backup to show you that. Now, what's important to understand is that Persian regnal years are from fall to fall. When we talk about the construction of a timeline, you have to understand where your years start and end. Because, say, Daniel might have been using a Babylonian calendar for some of his counts, not specifically this one, but in some cases he might have been, to refer to specific wars. Persian, fall to fall, but Jews, spring to spring. I don't care who says the Jews use a fall to fall calendar. Maybe they do now, but we are talking according to the Bible. The first month in the Bible, from Exodus 12 and beyond through the entire rest of the Bible, is the month Nisan. So if you are using a fall to fall calendar, trying to figure out these end times, you're doing it wrong, because the Bible doesn't use a fall to fall calendar. It uses a spring to spring calendar. So this is the importance of how you conduct your research. Is you need to know how the Bible's doing it. It doesn't matter how the Jews do it now. It matters how the Bible says it should be done. So this is part of the precision with regard to this research. If you're using a fall to fall calendar just because the Jews do it now, you're probably going to arrive at the wrong conclusion off the bat, because you're using the wrong type of counting. And this is why it's important. So let's go to Nehemiah 1. Nehemiah 1:1. The words of Nehemiah, the son of some person whose name I can't pronounce. It came to pass in the month Kislev in the 20th year, and I was in Shushan, the palace. So what you learn here is that the Persian regnal years are going to be from fall to fall, and we need to understand this to understand the correct starting point for the commencement of the 70 weeks prophecy. It's not spring to spring in this case. It is fall to fall in this case. And it tells you very explicitly in the text that it is. The month Kislev in the 20th year comes before the month Nisan in the 20th year. But the month Kislev answers to our December. So it is telling you in the book of Nehemiah that you are to put December and say March in the same 20th year, which means you're operating from a fall to fall calendar in order for that to be correct. Otherwise, if you're starting in the month Nisan, Kislev would be in the 19th year, not the 20th year, and Nisan would mark the beginning of the next year. But because December and March are in the same year, you reckon this on a fall to fall calendar. That is important. How so? Well, so August 1st is going to be the beginning of a fall, probably right around whatever their, I don't know if it was like September 1st. Well, I mean, August 11th, but I don't know like what their month names were and specifically how they started, whatever. If you go to the Persian historical record, it's August 11th, 465 BC. So then you're fall to fall. Okay, so I've got 10. 1, 2, make sure I'm counting here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And that's where you're going to have the 20th year, which is inclusive of both Kislev, December, and Nisan, March. So March would obviously be in the 445 part of that because you're comparing this to our type of calendar where December and then January would be the start of the next year because I'm using Gregorian calendar years. So we have to convert them properly. So March. It actually is March 14, 445 BC is when the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem occurred on. That is Nisan 10 of 445 BC. And we'll get to the importance of Nisan 10 as we move through here, but understanding that weeks of years have a Nisan 10 start date, which is why it came to pass in the month Nisan in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king that wine was before him. So in the month Nisan, maybe you don't know at this point what day in the month Nisan, it doesn't matter. Maybe you're going Nisan 1, that's fine. But you're in Nisan of 445 BC. Now, one thing that we come to understand about the 70 weeks prophecy, and I guess maybe I'll start this right here. Let's go to, so we're going to interrupt this to talk about the Jubilee timeline. And you will understand why Nisan 10 is so important. What am I showing? Okay, sorry. I knew I was going to show a couple of different things here. So we'll start right back up at the top. So we'll put that on hold for a second. I want to make sure it's showing. Sorry, YouTube isn't friendly with the sharing all the time. Come on. What is going on? I don't know why it does this. There we go. Okay. So here is the set where the 70 weeks prophecy merges with the know therefore and understand from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince. So this is how we understand how to count from point A to point B, which is Nehemiah 2 to the unto the Messiah the Prince. So this is going to be our weeks of years, i.e. Sabbath cycles for the land, i.e. Jubilee counts, how we arrive at a way to count to get to an endpoint correctly. So This is how we arrive at, I guess, more or less how we arrive at 1406 BC, but mostly how we count. How do I want to explain this? Sorry, I'm going to throw a lot of information at you guys, and I just want to make sure that I am sharing this in the best way. Okay, well, let's go through this. These are the data points used to construct a Jubilee timeline, and this is going to merge with what we're going to show in the remainder of the chart that we're going to go through. So I'll just show this now. Sorry, trying to figure out the best way to do this. I'm already going to overload you guys with information, so let's just let's just go for it. Okay, so this takes us back to the first of the data points that we're going to go through. Now, interestingly enough, the 20th year of the reign of Artaxerxes and the rebuilding of the city wall and the city gates at the request of Nehemiah, it talked about the city having been burned. The city was burned in conjunction with the destruction of the temple that was built by Solomon. So, to be completely honest, Solomon both begins and ends data points in this. Solomon, his reign and the construction of his temple both begins and ends all of the construction of this timeline. It is central to Solomon and his temple. And that's not ironic, because the commencement of the outstanding week of years that we're going to talk about as we move through this starts with the rebuilding of another temple, which is dimensionally exact to Solomon's. So all of this is predicated upon Solomon and the building of his temple to construct a timeline. And yet the 70 weeks prophecy does not use the rebuilding of a temple in its starting point. It uses the construction of the city. So this is why I say it's really important to make sure that we're starting from the correct spots, because if we're not, then we're going to arrive at wrong conclusions. So when you're constructing the Jubilee timeline, the central tenet here is going to be temple. But when you're constructing the know therefore and understand from the going forth the commandment to restore and to build a city, the temple is absent from that. So hopefully you understand, or will come to understand, that precision, it's not just being right. It's not just being accurate. It's about precision, and about the precision of these counts and the starting points, and making sure that we're using the right ones, counting the right way, and arriving at the right years. So we're going to start with the first of probably a dozen data points that I'm going to give you to show you how the Jubilee timeline is constructed and how counts are measured. So Jewish kings were crowned on Passover. Sure were. That's why Jesus was given a crown of thorns. It was mockery, because the sign that they put over his cross was, "This is Jesus, born king," or "This is, King of the Jews." They labeled him that because they had crowned him with a crown of thorns in mockery on Passover. And that's traditionally when Jewish kings were crowned, on that day. So we're going to start with Solomon. And I have all of the scriptures here to tell you why these things are important. Hi, Velda. Hi, Dan. Good morning to both of you. So when you go to the historical records, anyone who puts these in, even there are a lot of people with a lot of opinions. Let's just say it that way. So when you delve down into the research that gives you more reputable information than agenda-driven information, it's going to be somewhere around 971, 970, 969, somewhere in that area. So for the purpose of the timeline I'm using here, 970 to 930, 40 years. Chronicles, 2 Chronicles 930. Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel 40 years. So if you understand that the years begin on Nisan 1, again, understanding the importance of placing starting points in the month Nisan, because that is where The Jewish calendar should start from Exodus 12 through the entire rest of the Bible. The first day of the first month is always Nisan 1. So understand that. Stop. If you are trying to throw Tishri into the mix, stop that. If you're not, good. Don't, because it's wrong. So what you would understand of this is that Solomon was crowned 14 days into that year, 970. So then I have a count right here in yellow, 10, 20, 30, 40, and then 14 days into that year would be the full conclusion of 40 years. So 970 to 930 on a Nisan to Nisan calendar. Why is that important? Well, 1 Kings 6:1 gives us some data points. It came to pass in the 480th year, after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziph, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. All right, we've got a couple of different data points here. And there are a couple of different verses like this that give multiple data points that are helpful to the building of this timeline. But so what you see here is the 4th year of Solomon's reign, he began to build the house of the Lord. Okay, so what's the 4th year of his reign? 967 BC. All right, he began to build the house of the Lord. That year was also the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt. Okay, so I have, again, in yellow here, a count. So 10 plus 470 is 1446 BC. Okay, so these are the data points that we use from 1 Kings 6:1. There are two of them. You identify the year he began to build his temple, but more specifically, that's the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of Egypt. And it doesn't say it was 480 years after. It was in the 480th year after. This means you don't take this plus 480. This means you take this plus 479 to get to the 480th year. Maybe you arrive at the same spot by doing that, and maybe you don't. But when you're talking about precision, you have to read the words as they're written. It doesn't say it came to pass 480 years after. It says in the 480th year after, which means you have to count this as year 1, and then this would be year 480. Precision. I cannot emphasize that enough. Precision. Read the words as they're written and don't just say this plus this. No. It wasn't 480 years after. It was in the 480th year after. So again, that's how I construct my things. We read the literal text. We interpret it as literally and as close to textual accuracy as possible. So why is it important to know this year? Because Numbers 1434 rather. In the number of days in which ye searched the land, even 40 days, each day for a year shall ye bear your iniquities, even 40 years, and ye shall know my breach of promise. So that was where God extended the, I don't say curse, but the ramification for Israel being faithless during the 40 days he was first up the mount. That was the consequence that they bore, was that they were not going to be able to enter their promised land for the same number of years per day that they were faithless. And they were all going to, the men of age were going to die in the wilderness. And that led to a whole sequence of events after they actually entered their promised land, where they had to be circumcised in order to partake of the Passover. But regardless, this is where the original statement is made, 40 years for the 40 days. And that they would not be able to enter into the promised land because of their breach of promise, their breach of promise in upholding the covenant. This goes back to Exodus 24, when Moses read all of the words of the law in their sight, and they said, all the Lord has said we will do. And then he went up the mount for 40 days, and they lost their faith and tried to worship the golden calf that represented the gods of Egypt, where they had just come out, and all of that, because they thought Moses and God had left them. So that's, the story about that. But regardless, 1446. Well, obviously we know that they left on Passover. This is from Exodus 12. So again, Nisan 1, the year begins. In Exodus 12, that was the head of the year changed to the month of Abib, related to the barley. But they left on Passover. That was the Exodus, 1446 BC. And then they wandered for 40 years, which takes them to the end of 1406 BC. And they entered the promised land on the 10th day of the first month. So let's go over here to make, it was actually 40 years minus 4 days, because they left on Nisan 14 and they entered on Nisan 10, 40 years later. So Leviticus 25:2, speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them, when ye come into the land which I give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto the Lord. Okay, when did they come up into their land to start that Sabbath unto the Lord, which goes 6 years, thou shalt sow thy field and prune thy vineyard, gather in the fruits thereof. The 7th year is a year of rest, number 7 sevens, and in the 50th year, hallow and proclaim Jubilee. When did that start? The people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and encamped in Gilgal in the east border of Jericho. So that would be Nisan 10 of 1406 BC. If anyone wonders how I arrive at that conclusion, this is how. So here's just another chart which basically says exactly this. Exodus 1446 BC, 40 years in the wilderness to Nisan 10, entry into the promised land. So that's the start of your count. I don't really know why I have this here, but whatever. Maybe I just really wanted people to understand that. All right, so you could, we'll make this smaller. You could count, use the count that you're given in Leviticus 25. Number 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, prune thy vineyard, gather in the fruits thereof. The 7th year is a year of rest, number 7 sevens, and in the 50th year, hallow and proclaim Jubilee. So this is every period of 7 sevens and every Jubilee from 1406 to 2025. If you are interested in understanding what your Sabbath cycles will look like, I guess this is the first year of each of the 7 sevens, and then that's the 8th, which would be the first of the next sevens, meaning this, how to count Jubilees. I'll make this bigger because people get this wrong by just saying, it's the same kind of premise where people say 480 years after they came out of Egypt, this is the year he began to build the temple. So it's this year plus 480. No, it's in the 480th year. So it's this year plus 479 to get to the 480th year, just like I explained up here. Up here. It's not this plus 480, it's this plus 479 to get to the 480th year. It's the same kind of lack of precision where people try to count Jubilees, where they just say, oh, this plus 50, minus 50, depending on when you're, whether you're counting up or down BC or AD. And that is a lack of precision. Sorry, I don't mean to offend anyone, but it's a total lack of precision, and it's not following how the Bible says to count them. And so that's why people have 15 million different interpretations of what's a Jubilee year. Okay, 1406 is year 1. They shall 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, prune thy vineyard, gather in the fruits thereof. In the 7th year is a year of rest, number 7 sevens. Okay, and in the 50th year, hallow and proclaim Jubilee. So when you draw it out in the way that the Bible tells you to count, using 7 sevens, and in the 50th, hallow and proclaim Jubilee, you will find that this is just the first year of the next 7 sevens. It doesn't have a different start date. They're all Nisan 10, because you have a one-time benchmark event that says when this happens, start this count. Irrespective of what people would say about Leviticus 25:9, which has implication in something else entirely that has nothing to do with Jubilee years. The Jubilee year is simply the 50th year of a cycle that began on Nisan 10 of 1406. And the same beginning of each year, 50th year or otherwise, is going to have a Nisan 10 start date. So if you have questions about Leviticus 25:9, I have probably a dozen videos on my channel to explain to you what that was forward looking to. And it has nothing to do with Jubilee years. It was a declaration of Jubilee on a day forward looking to some event that foreshadowed Christ, specifically the beginning of his ministry. But it has nothing to do with Jubilee years. That is another point of contention out here. If you think it does, and you're using that to factor into your Jubilee year count, you're doing it wrong. Sorry to tell you, but you are. So what you will see, 1406, 1406, 1357 equals this minus this. Good job, Heather. What's the difference? It's 49. So this plus or minus 49 to count by Jubilees, not by 50s. I always include this to show people that counting Jubilees is not plus or minus 50. It's plus or minus 49 because you have to count the year you're in. So this minus 49 equals the next Jubilee year. And that is how you are able to, if you use the right method of doing this, you are absolutely able to calculate that if 1406, all you need to know is how many to count. 2025 is the 70th Jubilee. Now, people say, well, how do you know 70? Because that's the context of Daniel's chapter. He was in the 70 years of Babylonian captivity, receiving the vision of the 70 weeks, which includes a benchmark of 70 AD, which is between the end of the first 69 and the beginning of the 70th, stating that the 70th week of years will begin on the 70th Jubilee, and then Ezekiel backs that up. How do we know that Ezekiel backs that up? Because that's the rest of the data points that we're going to use. There is another verse which tells you, like 1 Kings 6:1 did, with the multiple different data points in a specific verse. Ezekiel, where is it? Where is it? Where's the verse? Did I delete it? I hope I didn't delete it. Well, that was dumb. Okay. Sorry. I don't mean to make you guys sick or anything. I need to go. I don't know. Maybe I had to cut and paste something and I missed it. Well, let's fix that right now. Oh, too funny. All right. Ezekiel 40, verse 1. I will. Where is? All right, let me see if I'm actually going to close this for a second. I don't know why I did that. So let's do this. Say hi to everybody in the meantime. I have it on another spot where it's saved, just not on that one. I don't know where it went. Hi, Deborah. Hi, Mrs. Riesel. Hi, Kelly. Nice to see you guys. I love finding out stuff at the last minute. Come on. Start sharing. Sorry, please hold while YouTube gets its act together. Yeah, I know. That's why I'm waiting to talk. I don't know why it doesn't like sharing things when I ask it to share things. Just takes a second. All right, we'll try this way. I don't know what the problem is, why it doesn't like sharing stuff. But thank you for your patience. What is going on? Okay, this is not cool. What? All right. Please, please, please work this time. Because I don't know why it wouldn't want to work. So let's try one more time. Maybe we'll share my entire screen. Yeah, we're definitely not going to do that. All right, come on, one more time. If it doesn't work, it's not meant to work. But come on. Come on, YouTube. So, Mrs. Resell, you say, I have heard from time to time that our calendar is possible out about 4 years, which then makes it confusing when calculating. So I don't entertain questions, or not even questions, but so people who are intent on building uncertainty into this can continue to do so, but I don't entertain that. Reason being, and William, one of my subscribers, says this perfectly, is that the Bible is designed to help us close our minds to things, to resolve and to conclude and to close our minds. People with perpetually open minds are never going to be able to understand or conclude anything. And that's not the purpose of my channel. The purpose of my channel is designed to be able to resolve, to conclude, and to close our minds on certain things. So if people are intent on believing that nothing is ever knowable because people messed with this in 14 different ways, then that's fine. But that's a type of uncertainty that I don't share. And we have a Gregorian calendar that has years. You can use them to count. You have to convert in some cases, but I personally will not entertain that because that is stuff from people who are intent on never being able to conclude anything. And we're just not the same. Like me and those people are just not the same. So if that's how they want to do their stuff, that's fine. But I don't do my stuff that way. And I will never do my stuff that way. So I appreciate that people say things like that, but it's unhelpful. And I'm all about trying to get answers. So I think, I don't know why that wasn't working, and I'm not happy at all that it wasn't working. So I guess let's try this one more time. Sorry, you guys. I don't know what the problem is. I mean, I know what the problem is. YouTube doesn't like me sharing stuff, so it makes things difficult for me. Yeah, there's not so much uncertainty as people try to inject. And I mean, that's honestly the study of the end times. there is a whole bunch of uncertainty in it where there shouldn't be, because people have messed with a whole bunch of stuff and started from wrong spots and counted wrong ways and all of that. And while I do understand that people are just trying to find answers, the way that we have gone about it is not helpful. And the way that people have interpreted how we can know what we can know, I think I'm not going to be able to continue with this video because I don't think it's going to let me share. I don't know what the problem is, but I think I'm going to have to stop this and do a part 2 because I don't know what it's doing. Like, I don't think it's going to let me share anything else. So I don't know what the problem is, but so I'm going to end this here for the sake of not keeping you guys looking at a black screen for an hour. But I think I'm going to have to end this here and restart my computer and do a part 2. We will pick up exactly where I left off and continue on. But I don't know what the problem is. I honestly have no idea. Like, I'm seeing it right in front of me, but it's a black screen. So, oh, look at that. It's there. Finally. I had to threaten to go away. Jeez, man. Okay. That was terrible. Sorry, and thank you guys for your patience. So let's do that. You know, Jesus loves me. Regardless of what anyone else tries to ever do, Jesus loves me. This I know. All right. So I'm just going to pretend that those were there. All right. Sorry. That's terrible. YouTube is a jerk sometimes. All right. Ezekiel 40 verse 1. And this is where we begin to identify other dates on our timeline, because you could do exactly what I did and from 1406 calculate what the 70th would be. But how do we know that 1406 is actually accurate? In order to and that our Jubilee timeline construction is accurate. In order to do that, you would have to have another data point which falls on the Jubilee timeline to validate that the construction of the timeline that we did is correct. And that's what this other verse does, is it provides another data point on the Jubilee timeline, meaning that there was an event which happened in a specific Jubilee year that you can plot on your timeline. So when you have additional data that plots on your timeline, then you know that your timeline is correct. So what we go to here is the Babylonian captivity. And this was the first, second, and third exiles of said captivity. And this was what Nehemiah was referring to when we go back to the 20th year of the reign of Artaxerxes, the city of his father's sepulchres lieth waste. He was actually referring to the events of 586 BC, where the city and the temple were sacked and burned, destroyed. But he was specifically referring to the city of his father's sepulchres lieth waste. Well, that happened in 586 BC. So that's what I said at the beginning of this. Solomon's temple, the reign of Solomon, the construction of his temple, and then obviously the destruction of that temple are central to the calculation of this timeline, which then, not ironically, will pick back up, resume with the construction of the third and final physical temple, which mirrors Solomon's exactly. So what this starts with is the Battle of Carchemish, which was the first exile of the Babylonian captivity, and that's referenced in Jeremiah 46 and Daniel 1. Then you're going to have specific Judaic kings that were told in 2 Kings, are the data points that I pulled from here. 2 Kings 23, 24, and 25. You're going to have Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah, who reigned for 11 years. And Jehoiakim was on the throne. Josiah was promised that he would not see the destruction of Israel during his reign. Interestingly enough, and this is beyond the scope of this, but just to say that in one of my books, I think it was Daniel's 70 weeks, there was an additional data point, which was Josiah's great Passover happened in a Jubilee year, the 18th year of his reign, 622 BC. And Josiah was promised, being a righteous king, that he would not see the destruction of Israel while he was on the throne. So after Josiah's son reigned in his stead, after Josiah's death, Jehoiakim, He was who was on the throne of Israel, the Judaic king that was reigning during the Babylonian captivity, the first exile. So here's 11 years measured. Here's the first exile of the Babylonian captivity. When he was deposed for 3 months after him, so approximately December to March, you have Jehoiakim reigning, and then that was part and parcel with the second exile of the Babylonian captivity. And then Zedekiah reigned for 11 years, and he was on the throne during the third and final exile of the Babylonian captivity, when all of Israel was carted captive to Babylon, and the city and the temple were sacked and burned. So that takes us to the year of Ezekiel's vision, which uses data points from those events. And I have, if you're not familiar with any of that, I have the Bible verses over there to tell you, you know, the years of their reigns and all of that stuff, and then you can read about it. So I'm just giving you the short version. But you have this verse from Ezekiel 40 using these data points. It says, in the 5 and 20th year of our captivity. Okay, well, there's 3 different exiles of the Babylonian captivities. So the year that he's going to be in is the 25th year from one of them. He's in the beginning of the year, which is the month Nisan, in the 10th day of the month. Okay, so he's on Nisan 10. In the 14th year after that, the city was smitten. So he's 25 years. He's in the 25th year from one of the exiles, and in the 14th year from another one of the exiles. Well, that means that he's in 573 BC, which is the 14th year from 586 and the 25th year from 597. In the selfsame day, the hand of the Lord was upon me and brought me thither. In the visions of God brought me he into the land of Israel, and set me on a very high mountain, by which was as the frame of a city on the south. And he brought me thither. He said, behold, I'm about to start quoting a verse that is not part of it at all. Ezekiel 40. Ezekiel 40. He brought me thither. Behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of brass, with a line of flax in his hand and a measuring reed, and he stood at the gate. And the man said to me, Son of man, behold with thine eyes and hear with thine ears, and set thine heart upon all that I shall show thee, for to the intent that I might show them unto thee art thou brought hither. Declare all that thou seest to the house of Israel. And behold, a wall on the outside of the house round about. So then he goes into the measurements for the temple. So in the context of this vision, which is also going to be a separate video, but prophecy is pattern, and what you're basically seeing is the foreshadowing of the anointing of the Most Holy occurring on the day that the vision was given. But what you see is that he's on the 10th day of the month Nisan. Why is that important? Because what's the 10th day of the month Nisan? Back up here to Leviticus 25:2 and Joshua 4:19. The 10th day of the first month is when the Sabbath cycles began to be counted, that led to the declaration of a Jubilee. Ezekiel's in a Jubilee year. So he's telling you he's on day 1 of a Jubilee year, based on what we understand from Leviticus 25:2 and Joshua 4:19. The whole premise for this is understanding the Jubilee and how it factors in. So really what you're trying to get to is, how many Jubilees do you need to count? Prophecy is pattern. Ezekiel is on Nisan 10 of a Jubilee year, prophesying about what's going to happen on Nisan 10 of the final Jubilee year. And in the context of Daniel's vision, 70 is your number. So this tells you that Ezekiel's prophesying on a day about said day in the future, which is the same day, the same type of year, 70 Jubilees from the inception later. And people can argue about whether that's valid or whatever. Context is all I can tell you. So that is how you arrive at how to count Jubilees. All of this, how you arrive at how to count Jubilees. So I'm not going to state that. But what I am going to do is go back to my original here. Now, what's important about this? The part that we are going to, I think, is not actually part of this timeline, but I'm just going to go over with you, is how do we understand that these need to be counted on a 360-day calendar? Everything within Daniel's prophecy. If it is not within Daniel's prophecy and you are simply counting years, then you can just count. It doesn't matter what calendar you're using. People get hung up on this. If you are just counting the number of times that the earth revolved around the sun, meaning you're just counting years, you don't need to count days. If you are within the confines of Daniel's prophecy, you must count days. So I will say this again. If you are not within the confines of Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy, you do not need day counts. If you are within the context of Daniel's prophecy, you do need day counts. Why? Because if part of his 70 weeks prophecy is measured by days, all of his prophecy, his 70 weeks prophecy, is measured by days. This is where Revelation factors in to help us understand that you must revert to a day count. Yes, the screen is black. Thank you. I do see that, and I am explaining in the interim. This is the last time I'm going to share my screen, so hopefully it will get its act together. Yeah, I have my phone up so that I can look at this on a different device and see that it's black to know when to stop and when to not stop. Because YouTube's dumb. They're dumb. They're not dumb. They give me a platform, so I appreciate them, but it's still dumb sometimes. Let's try one more time. All right, let's close that. I'm just going to wait for however long it takes this time because I'm not going to share another screen again. But this is one of those things too where people get into discussion of solar years versus lunar years, which honestly, that's confusing language to me because like what's a solar year, what's a lunar year? How about we just say 365-day years versus 360-day years? We know that we don't use a 360-day year on our current calendar. And we know that the Jews don't use a 360-day calendar. Theirs is 350 and change with that leap year every so often, or that leap month every so often. So we know that inherently we do not use a 360-day calendar, nor do the Jews. So we should know, at least on a surface level, that there's going to be some type of conversion involved in order to get to the type of calendar that Daniel's 70 weeks are measured in. And this is why it's important to go over this, that the day counts are imperative to tell you that you're supposed to use a calendar that has 360 days. So if you try to automatically convert to, say, the Jewish calendar or to the Gregorian calendar, which doesn't use the type of day count that Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy does, you're automatically going to be arriving at a false conclusion, a wrong conclusion. So this is why it's important to understand that Revelation and Daniel correlate. Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy, the 70th week of which is Revelation. So for people who wouldn't make that correlation and think that, say, the 70th week happened in 70 AD, which I've heard and I don't understand because 70 AD was a year, the 70th week is 7 years. So that to me, it seems nonsensical and I don't understand it. Let's try this again. Come on, prayer warriors, I need your help. Now I'm getting the spinning circle of death. But I do understand that there are some people who would say that 70 AD is when these things happened. And again, we go back to a very, very easy pretense. There we go. Thank you. Thank you. We go back to a very easy pretense that the 70th week is a 7-year period. And there was nothing surrounding 70 AD, which was a 7-year period. 70 AD was the events that happened in a year. And it was specifically the consequence of Israel not knowing the timing of the king coming to bring the kingdom on what would be the unto the Messiah, the Prince, April 6, 32 AD. Luke 19 prophesied about this. If thou hadst known, even thou at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto the kingdom, thy peace, which now they are hid from thine eyes. For that day shall come upon thee, that an enemy shall cast a trench about thee, shall compass thee round, keep thee on every side, shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another. Why? Because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. So that's why the events of 70 AD were important, because they were Israel's direct recompense for failing to accept Jesus when he came to present the kingdom to Israel. So when did he come to present the kingdom to Israel? So understanding that what we just went through on that other, and thank you guys for bearing with me. I really appreciate it. I greatly appreciate you bearing with me. AD was a direct result of Israel failing to acknowledge her Messiah. The triumphal entry was on Nisan 10. When you understand why Nisan 10 is important, and that's because that was the day Israel entered the promised land. That was the day upon which the Sabbath cycles began to be count, which are weeks of years, began to lead to the establishment of the Jubilee, which then we plot Jubilee years, 1406 BC being the beginning of the count, Nisan 10. And then we have another one which plots directly on that timeline, which is Nisan 10 of 573 BC, which is Ezekiel's vision. And you're also going to have Nisan 10 of 622, which is 4 days before Josiah's great Passover, which happened in a Jubilee year. So when you have these other events which plot on the line and they're specifically telling you that Nisan 10 is your date, then believe it. I mean, just believe it. That's the pivotal day. That's the day upon which everything is important, that everything important is going to happen. So when you understand that Nisan, it didn't say Nisan 10 of 445 BC. But when you understand that weeks of years, of which Daniel is using, Leviticus 25 weeks of years, and they all have that one-time benchmark event starting point, which is Nisan 10, then you're going to expect. This is an expectation. We resolve to conclude and close our mind to things that are inaccurate. You're going to resolve to conclude that Nisan 10 is your date, and you will find that data point respective to every single event which begins or ends a count related to the 70 weeks. And yes, close your mind to that, because you understand that Joshua 4:19 was a one-time event, and it specifically said Nisan 10 is your date. So regardless of whatever year you are working in, Nisan 10 is going to be your date with regard to anything belonging to Daniel's 70 weeks, the start or the end of any period of them. It's just, that's the way it's going to work. So in the month Nisan, the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king. So we're in Nisan of 445 BC. Okay. So an even period of 69 sevens later is going to take you to the same date, 69 periods of 7 later. And this is where I bring in the day count, why it's important to understand that if any of the 70 weeks are measured in 360-day years, all of the 70 weeks are measured in 360-day years, because prophecy is pattern. Prophecy is pattern. So in the book of Revelation, we observe that there are different ways of counting the same period of time. Now, specifically related to the second half of the 70th week, a time times it in half, 1260 and 42 months. Now, a time is 1 year, times is 2 years, and half is 0.5 years. And that's 3.5 years. So when it says a time times it in half, you're talking about 3.5 years. Okay. These are all the same thing. So what you're saying is that 3.5 years equals 42 months equals 1260 days. Well, that tells you that your periods of months are going to be 30-day months times 42. So we'll do equals this times this. 1260. Okay, so you are being told very precisely in the book of Revelation that you are using a 360-day calendar based on the fact that 1260 days is 42 months is 3.5 years exactly. That tells you that you are not using a 365-day calendar. You are not using a 350 and change day calendar that the Jews use with a leap month added every so often. You are using a 360-day calendar. If and since prophecy is pattern, and you expect to see that in Revelation, so you're using 1260 on either side of the midpoint equals a day count that everyone that I'm aware of understands, 2,520. From the commencement of Daniel's 70th week through the end of the 70th week, which is 7 years on a 360-day calendar, Jesus is coming back. 2,520 days. If and since we understand that of the 70th week, why people do not understand this of the first 69 weeks of years boggles my mind. However, prophecy is pattern. If and since one part of the 70 weeks prophecy is measured in 360-day years, every single part of the 70 weeks prophecy will be measured in 360-day years. It is the same weeks of years. So 69 times 7 times 360. Okay? Yeah, that's not plus, that's times. 173,880 days. From March 14th, 445 BC to April 6th, 32 AD is 173,880 days. But because there is a lack of converting to days before people convert to years, so a lot of people will just say, okay, 69 periods of 7, I need to see 483 years between this point and this point. Oh, I only see 476, so gosh, it must be wrong. And that's when they start messing with this and saying, oh, it's 10 years prior, and now I've got time to build in, and then, oh no, it must have been 70 weeks to the beginning of Jesus's ministry, or 70 weeks of years to his birth, or some other data point. This is legitimately where this starts, is people immediately converting to a number of years on our calendar and saying, oh, between the beginning and the ending, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem and to the Messiah the Prince, I need to see 483 years. That is the basis for so much of the inaccuracy that you see in this prophecy calculation. You were never instructed to convert it to years. You were instructed to convert it to days based on Revelation's continuity correlation with this, telling you that you are using a 360-day calendar. So Google it. Google it. If you want to understand this, Google it, and you will see 173,880 days from March 14th, 445 BC to, and don't even Google it, just do a time and date yourself. I can't stop sharing this window because it's going to give me the black screen of death again, and I don't want to go there. But honestly, if you are unsure about this, just look it up. It's all over. 173,880 days for the first 69 weeks of years on a 360-day calendar takes you from March 14th, 445 BC to April 6th, 32 AD. That is the know therefore and understand that from the going forth of their commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem and to the Messiah the Prince. So then if you want to plug it into our calendar and say, okay, but we don't use a 360-day calendar. We use a 365-day calendar. So what would that look like on my calendar? Then you can convert it to days. Great. How many years do you see? So a 69 weeks prophecy on a 360-day calendar equates to, on our calendar, converted to on our calendar is 476 years. And yeah, that's exactly the amount of time you see in between those dates. That's how you do that. So this is why precision. You need to do that. You need to convert it to days before you try to convert it to years, because it is not using a calendar that we use or that the Jews use. So that's 476 years, which is the amount of time. 445 plus 32 is, but since we don't use a year 0, you have to take out 1 year, 476 years. Okay? Works out. Very simple. People complicate it. Don't complicate it. Just count it the way it needs to be counted. So this takes us to the next part of where this is leading us. 32 AD. That's your Unto the Messiah the Prince. Nisan 10 Palm Sunday. Okay. We're going to go through all of this. So we're going to be here a hot minute. 32. So you're on a Nisan to Nisan calendar. Nisan 10 is the beginning of a year. It's not a Jubilee year. It's just the beginning of a year because Nisan is the first month of the year on the Jewish calendar. Again, doesn't matter what they presently do. You're going by biblical counts. So Nisan to Nisan, 32 to 33 AD. He's 10 days into the new year. That's your triumphal entry. Okay? The unto the Messiah, the Prince, is not the birth of Jesus. It is not the beginning of Jesus' ministry. It is the end of Jesus' ministry. It is a kingdom presentation to Israel. That is what they were supposed to recognize based on Daniel's day count and based on Zechariah 9. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee lowly and meek, riding the colt, the foal of a donkey. Okay, well, obviously, if we are supposed to understand 32 AD as the triumphal entry, specifically April 6, 32 AD, from our day count that we just went through, there are going to be other data points that we are going to be able to correlate. Now, how long was Jesus' ministry? 3.5 years. There are people who would dispute this as well. I don't care. It was 3.5 years. From Nisan 10, 32 AD, minus 3.5 years is Tishri 10, 28 AD. What information can we use to validate that Tishri 10, 28 AD would have been the start of Jesus' ministry? Well, Luke 3. And the reason I'm going through this now is because we're about to start the book of Luke. And Luke actually factors in two different times, Luke 3:23 and Luke 3:1-3. A couple of different times into this prophecy. So I thought, let's go through this before we start the book of Luke so that we have, for those of you who are here watching and have made it this far, you have a good baseline for understanding some of the timeline information that we're going to find in the book of Luke. So what you find in Luke, we'll start down here, Luke 3:1. And this has to do with the reign of Tiberius. Why is that important? Well, Luke 1 actually told us when it talked about the age difference between John the Baptist and Jesus, that John the Baptist was 6 months older than Jesus. So that becomes extraordinarily important when you understand that John the Baptist began to pave the way for Jesus. That 6 months difference is going to be huge because assumedly, John the Baptist would have began his ministry 6 months before Jesus began his. What year did John the Baptist begin his ministry? Now, in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip tetrarch of Iturea, and the region of Trachonitis, and a couple of other places, Annas and Caiaphas being the high priest, the word of God came unto John, the son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. He came into all the country about Jordan, preaching the baptism of repentance for the remission of sin. As it is written in the book of the words of Isaiah the prophet, saying, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord, make his paths straight. So the bottom line of that is it's in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius. So you go to the historical record, and there's a couple of points, well, probably just one note of contention about this, is that there are some people who say, well, no, Tiberius began his reign in 12 AD because he was co-regent with his father for 2 years before he began reigning on his own. And that's great. Maybe that's true. But in our timeline, it's irrelevant. Here, Tiberius began his reign in 14 AD. The 15th year of that reign, I have them all counted out. I always show my work because regardless of whether people agree or disagree, you never have to just take my word for it. I will always show my work. The 15th year of the reign of Tiberius, assumed from the time he began to reign by himself, takes you to 28 AD, which is exactly the year that Jesus would have began his ministry, if and since we understand it concluded on Nisan 10 of 32 AD. So John the Baptist would assumedly have begun his in and around the month Nisan, or at the beginning of that year, and Jesus in the fall of that year, 3.5 years before he ended said ministry in 32 AD. So I understand that people look for any reason to say, well, no, maybe it was different. That's great. And people can do that if they would like. But when we're looking for biblical information that aligns, and it's in your face that it aligns, maybe just you don't need to go look for something else, for some other reason for that to not be right. People talk themselves out of simplicity. And I would say that that's probably one of the biggest failures is to talk yourself out of simplicity and go for complication. This isn't complicated. You just have to make sure that you do it the right way. So we understand, taking the historical record information at face value, Tiberius began his reign in 14 AD. The 15th year of that is 28 AD, which aligns with the 3.5-year ministry of Christ, ending 69 periods of 7 on a 360-day calendar after the commencement of it, which is in the 20th year of the reign of Artaxerxes, March 14, 445 BC. Taking the historical record at its face value, we can easily conclude these dates. Now, there is another thing where people talk about, let's back up into this, because we're going to, I just want to make this smaller to see what else I need to talk about, if there's anything else. Probably not. Okay, so as you can see up here, we have the Jubilees. I'm saving what I think is the best for last, which is the Jubilees overlaid by the pattern in the mountain Exodus. This honestly is just fascinating to me, and it's going to be our double check system. So we're going to make all of our conclusions from biblical information, and then I'm going to show you the double check system that is built into the Bible to tell you that you're correct. So we're going to save this top part for last. But the Jubilee count that I came up with, or that I found on the other thing that I showed you, the other spreadsheet that I showed you with Ezekiel's data points and Solomon's data points and all of that, is up here. From 1406 to 2025, that is 70. There's a color code thing for a reason, and we'll get to that. But let's go to some of the more contentious information regarding what people expect to see in the historical timeline about the age of Jesus and why there is so much contention about this. This is actually pretty fun. So let's make that a little smaller and we can get, okay, this is fun. I like this. So what we have here, because I just like my color coding so much. And I will explain all of this as we go. I have years BC to AD, and it's going to always be Nisan to Nisan, not Tishri to Nisan, but Nisan to, or not Tishri to Tishri, but Nisan to Nisan. I have how old Jesus would be in any of those respective years. And this just alternates. The BC to AD, the years, again, Nisan to Nisan calendar, along with the age that he would be in those respective years. So we're going to back up from the beginning. So we're going to isolate some specific points, and understanding that Luke 3:23 says that Jesus was about 30 years of age. Luke 3:23, Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being as he was supposed the son of Joseph, which was the son of Heli. And then it goes all the way back to Adam. Now, what this tells us, the about 30 years of age, actually is a reference to the book of Numbers and the eligibility to enter the office of the priest. Now, what's extraordinarily important to understand is that Jesus was not technically entering the office of the priest. He was entering the intercessory role needed to offer himself for the sins of the people. Before I go to Numbers, I will explain that. The reason that I'm saying that Jesus wasn't technically entering the office of the priest is that Jesus was not of the tribe of Levi. He was of the tribe of Judah. So he never would have been able to be an earthly priest. However, what we see is a preview of two things. Hebrews 8, it says, "For if he were on earth, he should not be a priest, seeing that there are priests that offer gifts according to the law, who serve unto the example and shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle." But in Hebrews 7, it tells you that the priesthood was in the process of being changed because of Jesus. And then because of the change in the priesthood, there was also made of necessity a change of the law, because you're going to move from Old Covenant law written on tables of stone to New Testament written on hearts, sealed by the Holy Spirit, and mediated by the high priest, the royal priest from the tribe of Judah. But he was never an Old Testament Levitical priest. He was a New Testament royal priest. However, What you're being told by him being about 30 years of age is that he was about the age that demonstrated eligibility to enter the priesthood. Hebrews 7:12 said, "For the priesthood being changed, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. For he of whom these things are spoken pertaineth to another tribe, of which no man gave attendance at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord sprang out of Judah, of which tribe Moses spake nothing concerning the priesthood." It is important, it is imperative to understand that Jesus was not of the tribe of Levi, and he was not entering into the Old Testament priesthood, because there is critical distinction in every single point of what Jesus came to do and the covenant he came to shut up and the covenant he came to mediate, which is the new covenant. There is critical distinction to make. There is no overlap between them down to the tribe that he came from. So you are not intended to understand that he came in the capacity of a priest to minister to people under Old Covenant. You are to understand that he was always forward looking to shutting up the Old Covenant by paying for the sins under it, his sacrifice, and then to institute the new and to be the mediator, the high priest, and the royal priest of the new covenant. However, this tells you in Luke 3:23, being about 30 years of age means that he was eligible to intercede, because that is one of the jobs of a priest. It's not Numbers 14. It is Numbers 4. Numbers 4. Numbers 4, verse 1. The Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, who are Levites. Take the sum of the sons of Kohath from among the sons of Levi, after their families, by the houses of their fathers, by the house of their fathers, from 30 years old upward, even until 50 years old, all that enter into the host to do the work of the tabernacle of the congregation. So all that Luke is telling you, it's not telling you that he was 30 years old. It's telling you that he was of appropriate age to enter into an intercessory role on behalf of the people. And that is a reference to day one of his ministry when he became the scapegoat. He had the sins of Israel laid upon his head, which, come on, Luke 3, where are you? Which is what it had just been talking about in Luke 3. Now, when all people were baptized, it came to pass that Jesus also being baptized and praying, the heaven was opened, the Holy Ghost descended in a bodily shape like a dove upon him, and the voice came from heaven, which said, Thou art my beloved Son, in thee I am well pleased. And Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, as he was supposed, the son of Joseph, which was the son of Heli, etc. So it's telling you that at his baptism, he began to become an intercessor for the people, not a priest under the old covenant. Very important to distinguish. But telling you that he was of an age to be eligible in what would be that capacity. Should he be a Levite? He was not a Levite. So people expect that on day one of Jesus's ministry, he was 30 years old. And so because of that, they introduce other ways to calculate the birth of Jesus and all of these other things, which would lead from a birth to that day of 30 years. And that's not accurate to do. Reason being, we need to not rely on signs in the heavens. I understand that there was I understand that people say that there was some kind of eclipse on 1 BC or 3 BC, which denoted the birth of Jesus on Feast of Trumpets or something like that. I don't know. And then in 30 AD or 33 AD, they also relegate understanding the year of Jesus's death to signs in the heavens and things like that. There is so much reliance, so much attribution error made to these signs in the heavens that people say, oh, well, there was this eclipse in this year, and this must have been the year he died, or this must have been the year he was born because of that. The attributions that people make to these signs are so flawed. I would say don't pay attention to them at all. I don't pay attention to them at all. Signs in the heavens conversations are not welcome on my channel, specifically for reasons like this, is because people have destroyed the integrity of scripture by defaulting to those and those alone, and then assuming they know what those things mean, assuming that they meant anything, and then assuming they know what they meant. Jesus began to be about 30 years of old because that was telling us that he was, on account of his baptism, which occurred on Tishri 10, wherein he became the scapegoat, wherein the Spirit descended upon him and anointed his ministry, wherein he, as a result of the Spirit anointing him, declared a Jubilee. The Spirit is upon me because he hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. Luke 4, to bind up the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance unto the captives, the recovering of the sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. Preaching the acceptable year of the Lord and the kingdom of heaven is at hand is what he did for 3.5 years, from Tishri 10:28 AD to Nisan 10:32 AD, whereupon he presented said kingdom to Israel, and they rejected him. And 4 days later sent him to the cross, where he shut up the works of the old covenant. The works of the old covenant were payment for sin, were loving God and loving neighbor as self, dying for the sins of people, which is the ultimate sacrifice, shutting it up permanently, instituting the new covenant, becoming mediator, high priest, royal priest. And this is what Zechariah 6 says. Behold the man whose name is the branch. That's actually built in here too. He became the branch right here. We'll talk about that. But behold the man whose name is the branch. He shall grow up out of his place, Nazareth. He shall build the temple of the Lord. That's the spiritual temple under the new covenant as the chief cornerstone. And we are lively stones built up a spiritual house. He shall build the temple of the Lord. He shall bear the glory. He shall sit and rule upon his throne. He shall be a priest upon his throne. So he's king and priest upon his throne. This is talking about Hebrews 7 after the order of Melchizedek. Because of the priesthood being changed, there is also made a necessity a change of the law. For he of whom these things are spoken pertaineth to another tribe, of which Moses spoke nothing about attendance. What? Stop it, Heather. Hebrews 7. For it is evident that our Lord sprang out of Judah, of which tribe Moses spake nothing concerning priesthood. And it is yet far more evident, for that after the similitude of Melchizedek, there arises another priest. The similitude or the likeness of Melchizedek is being king and priest, uniting the office of king and priest in one person. And that's what Zechariah 6 is talking about. He shall build the temple of the Lord. He shall bear the glory. He shall sit and rule upon his throne, king from Judah, and he shall be a priest upon his throne, priest from Judah, which is a departure from the old covenant, and a sign of the new covenant is the combination of king and priest in one person in one tribe, which was a total departure from the way it was done in the old covenant. And the counsel of peace shall be between them both. So that's basically what all of this is talking about, is that from the beginning of his ministry, he was declared the scapegoat under the law to bear the sin of Israel, to agree to eventually die for the sin of Israel, which he would do as the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. But for those 3.5 years of ministry, he assumed the role of the scapegoat, had the sins of Israel laid upon his head, anointed on that day to declare Jubilee, which is liberty via the forgiveness of sins. That's what Leviticus 25:9 was forward looking to. Thou shalt cause the trump of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month in the day of atonement. You shall make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. Because that is what the Spirit anointed him to do, was to proclaim Jubilee throughout all the land. As a result of having become the scapegoat and agreed to bear their sins, he was proclaiming liberty via the forgiveness of sins, which is again what the New Testament translation of the Old Testament concept of Jubilee relates to. So for that 3.5 years, he proclaimed Jubilee. And then there was a kingdom presentation 3.5 years later. So people who are looking for Jesus to have been 30 years of age will say, okay, well, 28 AD, he must have been born in 3 BC. And so we back this up. We back this up to this state here. Jesus could not have been born in 3 BC because Herod did not die in 1 BC. So this is one of the flaws in the research, where people try to link these signs in the heavens to specific events and years and things like that and say, okay, well, this happened, so this should be what we would expect to see around this time based on this 30 years of age. And so this sign must relate to Jesus being born. Okay. But Jesus could not have been born in 3 BC because Herod did not die in 1 BC, which is what then people would say, because Herod, remember, he had babies 2 years and under killed. So they say, okay, well, Jesus was born in 3 BC because there was this sign in the heavens. So he had to be under 2 years of age. So then Herod died in 1 BC. Had to have been because of this sign and this expectation of this certain year count. Except none of that is right, because the historical record clearly tells you that Herod died on Nisan of 4 BC. There is a date that he died. There is a historical record that tells you that Herod died in spring of 4 BC. Well, yeah, Jesus was somewhere in the vicinity of 2 years of age, which means that he would have been born probably on Tishri 15, because Jesus was born on the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, which is why Jerusalem was full, because Tabernacles is one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals in which all male Jews are required to attend. That's why there was no room in the inn. But also there are other things besides which tell us that Jesus was born during the Feast of Tabernacles, like John 1, the word became flesh and dwelt, which is the Greek word skenu, which means to have my tabernacle among us. Tabernacles was a celebration of God dwelling among men. Jesus was born during the feast. And there's one day, the Feast of Tabernacles, is a solemn assembly, day 1. And that's what the 8th-day assembly was forward looking to, which is tacked on to the end of the Feast of Tabernacles, which was a 7-day festival, was the circumcision of Christ, where he took on himself the seed of Abraham. So Jesus was born on Tishri 15, probably of 6 BC, which would make him 18 months old when Herod died, which would put him at specifically the right age for Herod's command to have all male babies 2 years and under slain. Jesus would have been a year and a half old. So that makes sense. So we would approximate, and you will find anyone who isn't trying to follow the signs in the heavens, the 3 BC birth, the 1 BC death of Herod, people, but mostly just people who aren't like so hung up on these signs in the heavens, you will find that they tell you that Jesus was probably born in 6 BC. I mean, that's pretty expected to find. And you would, based on Nisan 4 BC death of Herod and Jesus being born in Tishri. So that's what I built into this. Don't complicate it, but literally just strike signs in the heavens from your, like, I would advocate, you can do whatever you want. Like, anyone can do whatever they want, but I would strike signs in the heavens from your vocabulary and from your research. I just would. For anything relating to all of this, signs in the heavens are 0% necessary. They never have been. No prophecy of the Bible is of any private interpretation. You don't have to guess. It tells you exactly what it means, and you can back into these numbers. I think the biggest thing where people misinterpret and then they develop expectations because of a misunderstanding is Luke 3:23 and the about 30 years old. But what you will find is that more than likely relates to something else. So what we're looking at is, if and since Jesus would have been born circa 6 BC, Tishri 15, first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, Tishri 15, 6 BC, he would have been 18 months old when Herod died. And there is research to say that it would have taken them about, 3 years, because they fled to Egypt. And then they came back and took the long way, and they settled in Nazareth. So I'm approximating that they would have been back in Israel about Tishri of 3 BC. That's what I'm saying. Now, if they had settled back in Israel approximately Tishri of 3 BC, then that is when Jesus would have fulfilled the prophecy in Matthew 2:23. Remember the Zechariah prophecy that I just read. Behold, the man whose name is the branch. That is the Hebrew word Nazareth, which translates to the Nazarene. Jesus was prophesied to unite the office of king and priest, to build the spiritual temple as the branch. Behold, the man whose name is the Nazarene. He will grow up out of his place. He shall build the temple of the Lord. He shall bear the glory. He shall sit and rule upon his throne, be priest upon his throne, and the council of peace shall be between them both. So he was prophesied to do these things as the branch. Another prophecy that says this is Isaiah 11. There shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch, capital B, shall grow up out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. So there are prophecies that he would do these things as the branch. Why is that important? Because the branch translates to the Nazarene. And there is a verse in Matthew 2:23 that tells you very specifically when he took the mantle of the branch. He came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. So when you're looking at Old Testament prophecies, behold, a man whose name is the branch, he shall grow up out of his place. It's talking about after they settled back in Nazareth, after he began to be called the Nazarene. So if you approximate that would have been about 3 BC, that he fulfilled that prophecy in Matthew 2:23, became the branch, then it was 30 years from 3 BC to 28 AD. Whereas the branch, he was prophesied to start his ministry, grow up out of his place, build the temple of the Lord, bear the glory, sit and rule upon his throne, be priest upon his throne, the council of peace shall be between them both. So that is what I would equate to the understanding that it was about 30 years. That's a reference to his eligibility to serve in the office of a priest, but more specifically, why you wouldn't expect to find him being actually 30 years old, because it's all contingent upon him becoming the Nazarene, which was done after Herod died and after they came back from Egypt and after they settled in Nazareth. From that time is when he began to be called the Nazarene. And from that time, there are 30 years from him being called the Nazarene, the branch, to the time when, as the branch, he would be prophesied to do these things. That's your 30 years. So it's not from his birth, it's from his assignment, the title of the Nazarene. And people can dispute that. They can think whatever they would like about that. But Matthew 2:23 is pivotal to our understanding about when he began to, I guess it was the timeline to the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies, because again, we say he was prophesied to do these things as the branch, as the Nazarene. And Matthew 2:23 gives you the starting point of that clock, which was not his birth. It was not his birth. Several years after his birth, when they settled back in Nazareth. So I present all of this information. You guys can think whatever you would like about it, but this is your 30 years. From the time they began to settle in Nazareth and he began to be called the Nazarene, that is when, from that time forward, was about 30 years. So he technically would have been approximately 33 years of age from his birth to that time, and he would have been 36 years old when he died. And just to say, he would have been 32 years because his birthday would have been 5 days after he began his ministry. So if you want to get that specific, Jesus was born on Tishri 15. So he would have been 33 5 days after he began his ministry. So he actually technically started it at the tail end of his 32nd year. So now let's go back up here. And so if we understand 2,000 years from 32 AD, then we would say, yeah, the second coming is 2032. But there's much more to that. So before I get to this, let me go back to chat and let me say some hellos to people who have come in. Hi, Rockhound, nice to see you. Hi, Drew, nice to see you. Hi, Christine, nice to see you. You're welcome, Mrs. Riesel. Have a good night. I think it's fascinating too. Hi, Roxanne, nice to see you. Hi, Owl and Rick, nice to see both of you. Hi, David, nice to see you. Hi, Lucifer, nice to see you. You saw all of my pictures, they were missing my face. Yeah, because I wasn't the focal point of that. I think I posted a picture of myself in one of them, but yeah, I wasn't the focal point of my trip. So, but yeah, it was fun. It was a good time. Okay, so do you guys have any questions so far? I understand that I've been going through a lot of stuff. But do you guys have any questions before I get to this last part? Because this is the double check system for all of it. And understanding that that there are ways to find this information, there are ways to calculate this information. It's always nice when God throws a double check in and he's like, hey, yeah, you're on the right track because look at what else you can find. Yeah, the hoodie pick. I got it at the Creation Museum. It says, what does it say? Property of my creator and savior, or something to that effect. So it was fun because a lot of people read it because I don't know if the color, I got that one specifically because it's orange, bright orange, and it's eye-catching. But also like people read the stuff, and there was one lady who actually commented that she liked my hoodie, and I was like, thanks. I like it too. So I was walking around the city with that plastered on my hoodie, so that was fun. Okay, I will just get to this because we've been here for a hot minute. So here's the last part. The Jubilee is overlaid by the pattern in the mount in Exodus. So we already understand how to count Jubilees, hopefully. And we already understand there are going to be 70, hopefully. If you have questions about that, defer to the first part of this video because I went over that, the Jubilee timeline, how it's all calculated, the day counts, the year counts, all of that. Already went through that comprehensively. So here is basically what that equates to. And I will also share that I have this box here to show the transition from BC to AD because there's no year zero. If you simply count from here to here and you do not exclude year zero, you will arrive at 2024 as your conclusion. Excuse me, your conclusion, and that would be inaccurate because if we're using the Gregorian calendar to count the revolutions of the earth around the sun, you don't have a year zero. Our calendar doesn't have that, so you have to count by the constraints of our calendar. So take out year zero, and it moves your Jubilee year from 1580 to 1688. And then you just keep on going. So I do show that in case anyone is unclear about how I arrive at 2025 instead of 2024. It's because you have to take out year zero and then add in a year at the end. So you still have the same number of years in your count. So because this is the true starting point, you wouldn't actually begin at creation. This is one of the flaws in the methodology also, is that people start at creation with the Jubilees. No, the Jubilee count starts when Israel comes into their promised land in circa 1406 BC, Nisan 10 of 1406 BC. And then you count forward, understanding how many you're supposed to count. And then you would arrive at an endpoint. Now, you wouldn't necessarily know what the benchmark of that end count is. I gave it to you in the previous chart. It's the construction of Ezekiel's temple. But you would have to drill down into the information to conclude that is. You just know that from here to here, taking out year zero, is 70 Jubilees, 2025. So that would be the commencement of something else. And then obviously there's going to be that 7-year period, which is the outstanding week of years, to the kingdom, which is 2,000 years from kingdom presentation number 1. Remember down here, 32 AD. So it's an exact 2,000 years from earthly kingdom presentation number 1 to earthly kingdom presentation number 2. The Lord my God shall come and all the saints with thee. Okay. But understanding that you're supposed to count forward and that Nisan 10, 1406 is your starting point, you can also count backward to approximate what the date of creation would be. Now, there's a couple of things that we take into account here. First of all, since you are not counting by 50s, you're counting by 49s. And again, if you don't understand that, go back to the beginning of this video because I go through all of that. So if you understand how you're supposed to count, you can go back to the beginning. But because you're not counting by 50s, there's not going to be 120 to equal 6,000. what you are going to find is that if you count back, the closest you can get to 4,000 is 4003 BC it would be Tishri 1, day 1, month 1 at that point before Exodus 12 changed the head of the year. Your day 1, month 1 was Tishri 1, which is why the Feast of Trumpets was a memorial to the creation of the world, the blowing of trumpets, which is synonymous with the voice of Jesus used in creation. So Tishri 1 of 4003 BC. But what you'll also find is that that's not an even 6,000 years. It is 4,003. Let's do this. 4,003, 2032, minus 1, because there's no year 0, 6,034 years of world history. Okay, so what do you notice about that? It's not 6,000. And we wouldn't expect it to be. $123 Jubilees equals 6,027 years plus 7 years for the 70th week. There's 6,034 total years of timeline in the world of world history. That means from 4003 BC to approximately here, 6 BC, when Jesus was born. It's approximately because the calendars were changed here. 3997 from creation to Christ, and then 36.5 years of Christ's life from birth to ascension, and then 2,000 years for the kingdom. So essentially what that boils down to is from Tishri 3 to Tishri 4003 BC to Tishri 3 when Jesus became the Nazarene. So from creation to Matthew 2:23 is 4,000 years. And then you have 34 years from Jesus becoming the Nazarene to his ascension. And then you have 2,000 years from his ascension to the kingdom, or more specifically from first triumphal entry to second triumphal entry. That's the breakdown of why there's 6,034 years instead of 6,000. Because the Jews who are looking for 6,000 and a lot of the end times people, studiers who are looking for 6,000, fail to understand that the timeline actually builds into the intervention of God in the affairs of mankind via the life of Christ. 6,034, not 6,000. So anyone who's saying 6,000 years of world history, you're actually absenting the life of Christ in that count, just like the Jews do. Don't be like the Jews. They don't understand Jesus. They don't believe in Jesus. But that's why there's going to be 6,034. From creation to kingdom, because God intervened in the affairs of mankind via the life of Christ. 6,034. So what you have here is, I don't remember, this was a long time ago that I found this, and I don't remember how I identified it. I don't remember. It was just one of those things, but whatever. There's a story told by the Pattern in the Mount. I think it was when I was writing the Jubilee in Ezekiel's temple, because the Jubilee in Ezekiel's temple, the events of Ezekiel's end times vision from chapter 40 through 48 are a direct correlation to the book of Joshua. And so I think I just took that even further back to understand that before that, there were 3 periods of 40 plus 2 days. So from the events of the giving of the law on Sinai through the end of the book of Joshua, you have an exact overlay of world history. So what we're looking at is you have 3 periods of 40 plus 2 days plus an extra 7. So let's take this from the beginning. You have a benchmark event. So I'm just going to ask you to look at the color coding here. I'll make this bigger. I'm going to ask you to look at the color coding here. So there's a benchmark event, which leads to a count of 40. That would be the giving of the law on Sinai. Then Moses was commanded to come up the mount to receive the tables of stone handwritten by the finger of God. He did that. That was during the time when Israel lost faith in Moses and in God, thinking that both had abandoned them, and they had Aaron fashion the golden calf. They danced around it naked. When Moses and Joshua came back down the mountain, they thought the camp was being invaded, but it was just Israel dancing naked around a golden calf. And then that led to the Levites slaying people to the tune of thousands. Moses, trying to throw himself on God's mercy, said, "Take me instead of them." And God said, "No, the innocent will not be allowed to pay for the sins of the guilty." In fact, the only innocent that was ever allowed to pay for the sins of the guilty was Jesus Christ himself. But because of Moses' intervention during these 2 days that he was down the mount, when the Levites were dealing with the people and he was interceding on behalf, God said, "Let's give you a do-over." So this takes us back to the days before the giving of the law. There were 3 days. In Exodus 19, God said, "Be ready against the third day." So on the third day, God descended in smoke upon the top of Mount Sinai, gave the law. Okay. So essentially what you have down here is Moses doing cleanup on the bad people, and he was ready against the third day. God said, "Come back up the mount, bring your own tables of stone. I'm going to give you the law." And then he did that. When Moses came down the mount, his face was, like going back and forth in my Bible, I don't even know what I'm doing. His face was shining like the sun because he had been in the presence of God, so much so that he had to wear a veil over his face and the people couldn't look at him. This is interesting because when we actually plug the numbers of world history back in, that tells a story, that foreshadows a story. But what you have here is Moses up the mount, that second period of 40. When he descends, his face is shining. The next chapters, that's in Exodus 34. Exodus 34. The children of Israel saw the face of Moses, and that the skin of Moses' face shone, and Moses put the veil back on his face until he went to speak with him. From Exodus 35 through the end of the book of Exodus, you will see everything related to the willful offering for Israel to give the instruments, implements, inks, dyes, all of that in the construction of the tabernacle, the clothes, all of that. Exodus 35 talks about the willful offering. And then all of the rest of the book of Exodus up to the final chapter, where they actually rear up the tabernacle in the wilderness, which is in the month Nisan of the second year of them being in the wilderness. But what is this second period, or this last period of 40 representative of? The curse that was poured upon Israel for what they did in these first 40 days is a year for a day. It was the 40 years that they wandered in the wilderness before they were able to enter into their promised land. At which point, Joshua 4:19, they came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and camped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And then there was what? A 7-year conquest for the land of Canaan, after which the land rested from war and the lots were parceled to the tribes in the promised land. So this is actually right here, this is Ezekiel's end times vision, which is an overlay of the book of Joshua. You have a benchmark event which begins a count of 7 years, and that's the measuring for Ezekiel's temple, the reconstruction, probably the laying of the chief cornerstone of that temple, or laying of the cornerstone of that temple, if not the incense offering, which begins the morning and evening sacrifices. So there's going to be something related to an instituting of the law regarding the temple that is going to benchmark the count of 7, count down to the arrival of Christ. But regardless, you have a benchmark event which is going to involve Ezekiel's temple from Ezekiel 40, which is the 70th Jubilee, Nisan 10 of the 70th Jubilee, which if 1406, then Nisan 10 of 2025. That's going to begin to count a 7-year conquest for the land, after which the land is going to rest from war when Jesus comes back, puts an end to it. Ezekiel 43 talks about the anointing of the Most Holy, which is the 6th and final purpose for the 70 weeks, as cited in Daniel 9:24. And Ezekiel 48 talks about the parceling of the lots to the tribes in the kingdom. So Ezekiel 40 from chapter 40, Ezekiel's end times vision, rather, from chapter 40 through 48 is a precise overlay of the book of Joshua in type and shadow, as you have a benchmark event which begins a count of 7, after which where there's a conquest for the land, after which the land rests from war, the lots are parceled to the tribes. So that is precisely what the end times vision, what the book of Joshua foreshadows of Ezekiel's end times vision. But this is why I say there's a double check system built into this. In world history, the pattern of the events which occurred from the giving of the law, actually from the command to be ready against the third day, and then the giving of the law, the 40 days up the mount, the 2 days down to deal with the people, back up the mount for 40 days, and then the 40 years that they wandered in the wilderness, and then entering the promised land, the 7-year conquest, and then the parceling of the lots of the tribes. From Exodus 19 through the end of the book of Joshua, it is a precise overlay of world history in type and shadow. Now, the one part I forgot to mention, and I will end with this, aside from questions, is people say, well, how do you know there's 6,034 years of world history from creation to kingdom? And this is the pattern of the Sabbaths established. You have 2 of the 3 methodologies relating to the Sabbath inherent in all of these timelines, and that is the Sabbath for the land and the Sabbath for world history. The pattern of the Sabbath was given in Genesis 2, where God created for 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested. That was built into the law for Israel, specifically one of the 10 commandments given to Israel at this benchmark event in Exodus 20. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. And then it was the Sabbath for the land in Leviticus 25, where you number 6 years, thou shalt sow thy field, prune thy vineyard, gather in the fruits thereof. The 7th year is the year of rest, number 7 sevens, and in the 50th, hallow and proclaim Jubilee. So like this whole thing is predicated upon the land Sabbath, counting from beginning to ending, a period of 70. But then the whole overlay of world history is 1 day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as 1 day. It's not exact because it is as. So in the likeness of the Sabbath, you have the totality of world history from creation to kingdom. So it's going to be approximately 7,000 total years. Here we see it's not exactly 6,000, it's 6,034 because of the direct intervention of God in the affairs of mankind via the life of Christ from Matthew 2:23 to here, 34 years. 33 and a half, something like that, regardless. From the prophecy of Jesus becoming the Nazarene to the time when he rose is approximately, or was it? Yeah, sorry. Yes, from here to here, 34 years approximately. So that's why there's not 6,000 total. There's 6,034. It's because people are failing to account for the fact that God intervened in the affairs of mankind, and the timeline of world history includes that. There's not 6,000. There are not. But from creation to kingdom, it is all calculable by the type and shadow of the Sabbath. So 1 day is not 1,000 years, is as, which means similar to, not the same, in the likeness of. And the reason it's not exact is because of the life of Christ. So these are the timelines that I have created. And I think that these are for serious students of Bible prophecy who are really, truly interested and invested in understanding the timelines, the data points, the calculations, the precision, all of that. This is what I have created. You don't have to, it's not what I've created, it's what I've put together. All of these are relevant data points in the Bible. You just have to search for them, understand them, go to the historical records, see the years of which all of these things happen, but make sure that you're using the right day counts, that make sure that you're using the right conversion methods, that you're picking the right starting points, all of that. But between this and the other timelines, which are both free resources on academia, I have basically gotten you as close to exact as I possibly can. Now, again, these are prophetic events, so this is all speculation because all I can do is say, well, this is what the Bible says, and we count from point A to point B, and the types and shadows, the patterns, all of that. So this is the best I can do, but I think that my best is pretty darn good. So this is called Biblical Events Overlaying World History. And the other one is called, I'm not sure, but I will look real quick. David, you said we don't count days that are not in existence. There you go. Wonder why everyone says he died at 33. Because they take the about 30 years of age as a literal statement rather than understanding that the count began from something other than his birth. And that it's mostly a reference to the Numbers 24 eligibility for priesthood. More than his literal age, it's a reference to the eligibility to enter the office of priest. The priesthood being changed, there was made of necessity also a change of the law. Hi, Thomas. Nice to see you. So let me go to my academia page real quick. I'm not going to try to bring it up, but I will tell you. And the stuff is always linked below in my videos. Let's see. It's called A Comprehensive Jubilee Timeline. That was the first one that I showed you. Sorry, I guess kind of the middle one that I showed you, that has from Solomon to Ezekiel and all of the different data points. So I will actually, that's the first one. And here's the one that I just hit up on the screen. Okay. And let me see if there's anything else I should. Nah, that'll be fine. Those two. Hi, Alicia. Nice to see you. Hi, Adam. Nice to see you. Okay. So are there any questions about anything that I went through? Maybe there's a lot, maybe there's none. But if you guys have any, I'll probably just let you sit and digest. Thank you for hanging in there with my black screen of death. I have no idea why YouTube was not being kind to me this morning, but hopefully it doesn't, hopefully when it converts and stuff, it doesn't mess up. I don't know what it'll do, but yeah, hopefully it wasn't too bad. But I appreciate you guys hanging in. Got a couple hours of content here, but I took you through everything. The most important data that I think any serious end times Bible prophecy student should know. Agree or disagree, that's fine. For my purposes, that doesn't matter. But I showed you how I arrive at my conclusions, and you guys can draw your own. I give you all of the reference material that I used in the verses, 100% of it, so you can follow the trains of thought. Couple of takeaways from here. First of all, exclude signs in the heavens from your research. If you are a serious Bible student, exclude signs in the heavens. And I'm not saying that you're not serious if you include those, but if you are trying to get to definitive answers, those are the least helpful thing possible. So if you're serious and you are intent about this, exclude those. Cast that language out of your vocabulary. They're not helpful. And they have messed up a lot of people from getting to conclusive, correct answers. And that's jumbled a lot of stuff. It'll lead you to inaccurate starting points. It'll lead you to inaccurate ending points. And it's just not helpful. Go to historical records that are free from agenda. If you're just looking for a historical record to tell you when their king reigned, and that's all, like Artaxerxes, and you're not, trying to mess with his timeline because you think you should see a certain amount of years that you don't see, and so you need to fiddle with stuff. Make sure that you're counting the correct way. If you are doing conversions, make sure you're doing it the correct way. Make sure that you allow the historical records to tell you the truth and don't mess with that. Let it say what it says. And then if you are using a process to find an answer and that answer isn't what you think it should be, then maybe your process is wrong. Maybe the starting point was fine and maybe the ending point is fine, but your process in between is making you think it's wrong. So I would evaluate your own processes. Don't assume that you are correct and that they are wrong. Assume that they are correct, and we need to find out why there's a difference. But I've given you all of the information. I've given you all of the data points. I've given you all of the verses. I've given you my methodologies, all of that. If you have any questions at all, please. Okay, so Rick, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you think this channel is about, but just about 100% of your comments are outside the scope of what we allow here. So I would evaluate whether you are in the right spot. I think you are, but maybe reevaluate what you're trying to link to things. But anyway, having said that, I'm going to leave you guys. If you have any questions at all, let me know. We're going to start with Luke in the near future. And hopefully some of what we will go through in Luke 1 through 4 will, if you go through this first, it will be helpful in our discussion of Luke 1 through 4 because a lot of it will be reevaluated. So I wish you guys a wonderful day. I've talked a lot, thrown a lot at you. I will sign off. I'll see you guys later.